During breakfast, my 6-year-old grandson looked up from his cereal. "Daddy does something weird to your car after you leave." The words hung in the air. I kept my voice calm. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Then he said 4 words that saved my life. He touches the brakes. "Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button." Now let me take you back to how I got to this moment. Sitting in my daughter-in-law Emily Miller's pristine kitchen, coffee growing cold in my hands while my world crumbled around me. 3 months earlier, I thought I had the perfect life. Carol Miller, 58, living in suburban Madison, Wisconsin, with my husband, Mark Miller, of 22 years. We had our routines, our comfortable existence, our Sunday dinners with my son, David Miller, and his wife, Emily, and little Ethan Miller. I taught 3rd grade for 30 years before retiring last spring. Mark worked construction management, steady income, good benefits. We were not rich, but we were comfortable. David was my son from my first marriage. I had been a young single mother when Mark came into our lives. Mark had raised David from age 8, been more of a father to him than his biological dad ever was. David called him Dad. Ethan called him Grandpa Mark. And for 22 years, we had been a real family. Mark had been acting strange lately, though. More attentive than usual, almost overly solicitous about my driving. "Maybe I should follow you to the grocery store," he would say. "These winter roads can be tricky." He had started insisting on walking me to my car each morning when I went to volunteer at the community library. Sweet, I thought. Protective husband behavior. How naive I was. That Tuesday morning, Ethan's innocent observation hit me like a sledgehammer. Children see everything, do they not? They notice details adults miss because their minds are not cluttered with the assumption that people they love would never hurt them. "What kind of touching, Ethan?" I asked, keeping my voice light while my heart hammered against my ribs. "He crawls under there and does stuff with tools. Real quietike." Then he wipes his hands and comes back inside. Emily was loading the dishwasher, not really listening. She worked as a dental hygienist and had early appointments. David had already left for his job at the power company. Just me, Ethan, and the weight of his words. "Does Daddy do this a lot?" I asked. Ethan nodded solemnly. "Every time you visit, after you drive away, he goes out there with his flashlight thing." My blood turned to ice water. Mark had been alone with my car multiple times recently. Last week, when I had visited for David's birthday the weekend before, when I had babysat Ethan overnight. All those times, Mark had walked me out, hugged me goodbye, watched me drive away with what I had interpreted as loving concern. I managed to finish breakfast without alerting Emily to my internal panic. When it was time to leave, I kissed Ethan goodbye, my hands shaking slightly as I gathered my purse and jacket. "Drive safely, Carol," Emily called from the kitchen. "Same as always." "I always do," I replied, but the words felt different now. In the driveway, I stood beside my Toyota Camry key in hand, afraid to get inside. What if Ethan was right? What if Mark had done something to my brakes? The drive home was 15 minutes of winding suburban roads with several steep hills. That was when I realized something that made my knees weak. Mark had a $2.4 million life insurance policy on me. I called my mechanic from Emily's driveway, hands trembling as I dialed Ryan Carter's number. Ryan had been maintaining my car for 8 years. If anyone would tell me the truth, it would be him. "Ryan, it is Carol Miller. I need you to look at my car immediately. Something might be wrong with the brakes." "What kind of wrong, Mrs. Miller? You hearing squealing pedal feels soft." "I think someone might have tampered with them." Silence then. "Mrs. Miller, that is a serious accusation. You sure about this?" "I am not sure about anything anymore. Can you meet me somewhere I am afraid to drive?" Ryan agreed to come to Emily's house. I called her from the driveway and made an excuse about car trouble. She rushed out, genuinely concerned, helping me figure out what to do. Sweet Emily, who had no idea that her father-in-law might be trying to murder her mother-in-law. When Ryan arrived in his tow truck 30 minutes later, he went straight to work. I watched him slide under my car with his flashlight, Emily making nervous small talk beside me while Ethan pressed his nose against the living room window. Ryan emerged after 10 minutes, his face grim. "Mrs. Miller, we need to talk privately." Emily excused herself to get ready for work, taking Ethan inside. Ryan wiped his hands on his coveralls, avoiding my eyes. "Well," I asked, though I already knew the answer from his expression. "Someone has been at your brake lines, ma'am. Recent work, too. Not professional work. Whoever did this wanted it to look like regular wear and tear, but they made it sloppy enough that complete failure was guaranteed within a few more miles." The world tilted sideways. "How many more miles?" I asked. "Hard to say exactly," Ryan replied. "Could have been today, could have been tomorrow, but soon. Real soon." I thought about the route home from Emily's house. The steep hill on Oak Street, where I always had to brake hard for the stop sign, the busy intersection at the bottom where morning traffic moved fast. "Ryan, I need documentation photos, whatever you can give me, and I need you to fix this quietly." "Mrs. Miller, this is attempted murder. You need to call the police." "Not yet. I need to understand what I am dealing with first." Ryan spent another hour documenting everything, taking photos from multiple angles, making notes about the specific type of damage. "This was not random vandalism," he confirmed. "This was targeted, deliberate work done by someone who knows enough about cars to make it look accidental." Mark had worked in construction management for 25 years, but before that he had served 6 years in the Army as a combat engineer. He knew explosives mechanics and had what he called practical problem-solving skills from his military training. He had rebuilt car engines as a hobby since his 20s. He often said it reminded him of the equipment maintenance he had done overseas. After Ryan towed my Toyota Camry to his shop, Emily drove me home. I sat in the passenger seat of her SUV making conversation while my mind raced. How long had Mark been planning this? The insurance policy had been purchased 18 months ago. He had insisted on it after his friend James Thompson died unexpectedly, leaving his wife in financial trouble. "Just want to make sure you are taken care of if something happens to me," he had said. But it was not a policy on his life. It was a policy on mine. At home, Mark was in the garage working at his workbench. He looked up when I walked in, smiling that familiar smile I had loved for 22 years. "How is the car running, honey? Any problems on the drive home?" "Fine," I lied smoothly. "Ryan is going to do some routine maintenance tomorrow, though. Thought I would catch any issues before they become expensive." Something flickered across Mark's face too fast for most people to catch, but I was looking for it now. "That is smart," he said. "Cannot be too careful with car maintenance." "No, I thought you certainly cannot." That evening, I cooked dinner like always. We watched television like always. We went to bed like always. But I lay awake until 3:00 a.m., listening to Mark's breathing, wondering how many other ways he had considered killing me. When his breathing finally deepened into sleep, I slipped out of bed and went to his office. Time to see what other surprises my loving husband had been hiding. Mark's home office was off limits to me. Had been for years. "Just work stuff, boring financial paperwork," he had always said when I had offered to help organize it. "You do not need to worry your pretty head about any of it." Your pretty head. The phrase made my skin crawl now. I had never questioned his privacy before. Trusting wives do not snoop through their husbands' files. But wives whose husbands sabotage their brakes are not exactly living in normal marriages, are they? His filing cabinet was locked, but I knew Mark. He was not creative with hiding spots. I found the key in his desk drawer, taped under the pencil tray, the same place he had hidden Christmas presents for 20 years. The insurance policy was in the first folder I opened. $2.4 million exactly as I had remembered. But there were other papers with it: beneficiary forms, claim procedures, contact information for the insurance agent. He had done his homework. Then I found the life insurance application. My medical information, employment history, lifestyle questions, all filled out in Mark's handwriting, not mine. I stared at my supposed signature at the bottom. It was good. Very good. Mark had always been artistic. Plus, his military training had included some document work he had never talked about in detail. But I had not signed this application, which meant Mark had forged my signature on a $2.4 million life insurance policy. That was when I found the second folder. Financial statements I had never seen before. Credit cards in my name that I had never opened. A second mortgage on our house that I had never signed. Bank statements showing large cash withdrawals from accounts I did not even know existed. My husband had been systematically destroying our financial life while planning my death. The third folder contained something that made my blood freeze. Maps. Hand-drawn maps of my regular routes, the community library, the grocery store. Emily's house, notes about traffic patterns, road conditions, and optimal timing. He had been studying my movements for months. At the bottom of the stack was a calendar, my weekly schedule marked, in Mark's handwriting, doctor appointments, volunteer shifts, visits with Ethan. Everything documented, planned, and predicted. Today's date was circled in red with a single word. Today. He had expected me to die today. After leaving Emily's house, driving down Oak Street, hitting those sabotaged brakes at exactly the wrong moment. I photographed everything with my phone, my hands shaking so badly I had to retake several shots. Then I put it all back exactly as I had found it, locked the cabinet, and returned to bed. Mark was still sleeping peacefully beside me. The same man I had shared breakfast with every morning for 22 years. The same man who had brought me coffee in bed on Sundays, who had helped me grade papers, who had cried at David's graduation. The same man who had spent months planning my murder. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Why now? What had changed? We were not rich, but we were not struggling either. Our marriage was not passionate anymore, but it was not awful. We had settled into comfortable middle age together. Then I remembered something that made everything click into place. 3 months ago, my mother had died and left me her house in Clearwater, Florida, fully paid off, worth about $450,000. I had mentioned maybe selling it and using the money to travel in our retirement. Mark had been very interested in those plans, very supportive, very encouraging about the idea of having extra money to enjoy our golden years. Except he had apparently decided to enjoy his golden years without me. The next morning, I made breakfast as usual. Mark kissed my forehead, asked about my plans for the day, reminded me to drive carefully. Always do, I replied, watching his face carefully. He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. After he left for work, I called my sister, Eleanor Davis, in Phoenix, Arizona. Eleanor was a retired paralegal who had always been the suspicious one in our family. Ellie, I need help, and I need you to listen without interrupting because this is going to sound insane. I told her everything. Ethan's observation, Ryan's findings, the files in Mark's office. Eleanor listened in silence until I finished. Carol, you need to get out of that house right now. I cannot just disappear. He will know I am on to him. Then you need evidence. Real evidence. Enough to put him away forever. How do I get that without getting myself killed? Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Remember my friend Helen Walker? The one who went through that messy divorce? She is FBI now. Works white-collar crime. Let me call her. FBI Ellie, this is not white-collar crime. Insurance fraud, forgery, attempted murder for financial gain. Trust me, this is exactly Helen's area. She will know what to do. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee, looking around at the home I had loved for 15 years. The yellow walls I had painted myself. The herb garden, visible through the window. the refrigerator covered with Ethan's drawings. Everything felt contaminated now, poisoned by the knowledge that my husband had been sitting at this same table eating meals I had cooked, planning my death. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. "How is the car running today? Hope Ryan finds everything in good shape." I stared at the message, seeing the carefully crafted concern for what it really was: surveillance. I typed back, "Everything is fine. Ryan says just routine stuff." Then I deleted the conversation and started planning how to stay alive long enough to put my husband in prison, because that was where this was heading. This was not a marriage counseling situation. This was a federal case. And I was going to make sure Mark Miller learned exactly what happened to men who underestimated their wives. Helen Walker arrived at my house the next morning, dressed like any other suburban professional. Mid-40s, competent smile, the kind of woman who could blend into any PTA meeting or book club. She was also a federal agent with 15 years of experience in financial crimes and domestic terrorism. "Eleanor told me the basics," she said, sitting at my kitchen table. "But I need you to walk me through everything from the beginning. Every detail, every document, every conversation you can remember." I showed her Ryan's photos, the pictures I had taken of Mark's files, Ethan's innocent revelation that had started everything. Helen took notes in a small notebook, occasionally asking questions that made me realize how much I had missed. "The life insurance policy," she said. "When was it purchased?" 18 months ago, right after his friend James Thompson died." "And James's death was natural causes?" The question stopped me cold. "I assumed so. Heart attack? Mark said James was overweight, high blood pressure." Helen made another note. "We will need to look into that." "What about other friends, family members? Anyone else who has died unexpectedly around your husband?" My mouth went dry. "You think there have been others?" "Men who are willing to murder their wives for insurance money rarely start with their wives. There is usually a pattern of progression: family members, friends, people they could practice on." I thought about Mark's Uncle Frank Sullivan, who had died in a car accident 2 years ago. Mark had been devastated, or at least that was how it had seemed. Frank had left Mark his vintage Mustang and a small inheritance. His Uncle Frank, I said slowly. Car accident, single vehicle lost control on a wet road. Helen's pen stopped moving. "Your husband was the beneficiary partially. Frank did not have children. We will need to examine that case too." Helen closed her notebook. "Carol, I am going to be direct with you. If your husband has done this before, if there is a pattern, then you are in immediate danger. Not just from sabotaged brakes, but from escalation. When killers feel cornered, they get desperate." "What do you suggest?" "First, we need you wired. Everything Mark says to you from now on needs to be recorded. Second, we need surveillance on him. If he is planning something else, we need to catch him in the act." Helen opened her briefcase and pulled out a device the size of a button. "This goes in your jacket pocket, voice activated, 8-hour battery life, FBI-grade equipment. What if he finds it? Then you run immediately. Do not pack. Do not hesitate. Just run." That afternoon, I wore the wire to have lunch with Mark at his favorite restaurant. He had suggested it that morning, saying we needed to spend more quality time together. Quality time? Right. "You seem tense lately," Mark said over his burger. "Everything okay?" "Just thinking about Mom's house in Clearwater, all the decisions I need to make." His expression shifted subtly. "What kind of decisions?" "Whether to sell, whether to keep it as a rental property, financial stuff. I might need to talk to a lawyer about the tax implications." "I could help with that," he said quickly. "No need to involve lawyers for simple estate planning." I forced a smile. "That is sweet, but this is pretty complex. Mom had some interesting investments I'm just learning about." Mark's fork paused halfway to his mouth. What kind of investments? Certificates of deposit, some stocks, a trust fund I did not know existed. Apparently, I inherited more than just the house. This was a complete lie. My mother had died with barely enough money to cover her funeral expenses, but I wanted to see how Mark would react to the possibility of more money. He tried to look pleased, but I saw the calculation in his eyes, the adjustment of plans. That is wonderful, honey. How much more? The lawyer said maybe another $350,000 once everything is settled. Mark nearly choked on his water. $350,000 could be more. The trust fund has some restrictions, but after I turned 60, it all becomes available. I was 58. In Mark's mind, I was sure he was doing the math. 2 years to wait or speed up the timeline. We should celebrate, he said. Maybe take that trip to Europe we have talked about. That sounds lovely. I reached across the table and took his hand. I am so lucky to have such a supportive husband. Mark squeezed my fingers, smiling that loving smile. I just want you to be happy, Carol. That is all I have ever wanted. The wire caught every word. That evening, Helen called with an update. We have been monitoring Mark's phone and computer activities. He has been researching untraceable poisons ways to stage accidents, and he has made contact with someone who specializes in forged documents. More forgeries. We think he is trying to get access to your mother's supposed estate, create documents that would make him the beneficiary instead of you. I sat down heavily in my chair. How long has he been planning this? Based on the digital evidence, at least 2 years, maybe longer. Carol, there is something else. We ran background checks on the other deaths in Mark's circle, his uncle Frank Sullivan, his friend James Thompson, and his former business partner Gary Wilson 3 years ago. Gary supposedly died of cancer. Gary died of poisoning that presented as cancer. The symptoms are nearly identical. If you use the right combination of chemicals, your husband's military background included chemical warfare training. He would know exactly what compounds to use. My stomach turned over. How many people has he killed? I asked. We are not sure yet, Helen said. But we think you were never meant to be his first victim. You were meant to be his biggest payday. After Helen left, I sat in my kitchen staring at the herb garden where Mark grew tomatoes every summer. He had always been so proud of those tomatoes, so knowledgeable about soil composition and fertilizers. Fertilizers that could be turned into poisons if you knew what you were doing. Which, apparently, he did. I called Eleanor. Ellie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. What is it? That summer 3 years ago, when you visited us, you got sick. Remember food poisoning, we thought? Silence. Then, Carol, what are you saying? You were sick for weeks after you went home, lost 15 pounds. Your doctor could not figure out what was wrong. You think Mark poisoned me? I think Mark has been practicing. Eleanor's voice was shaky when she spoke again. Oh my God, if you had not figured this out. I know, but I did figure it out, and now I'm going to make sure he pays for all of it. Because Helen was right about one thing. When cornered killers got desperate, but they also got sloppy. And I was betting that Mark Miller was about to make the mistake that would put him away forever. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Mark announced over breakfast that he wanted to take me on a romantic weekend getaway to Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Just the two of us, he said, buttering his toast with elaborate casualness. We could stay at that bed and breakfast, you like the one with the fireplace in every room. That sounds wonderful, I replied, while every instinct in my body screamed danger. When were you thinking? This weekend, he said. I already made reservations. Of course he had. Remote location, isolated rooms, probably cash transactions that would not leave much of a paper trail. I would bet my life insurance policy that Mark had researched the perfect spot for a tragic accident. I called Helen the moment Mark left for work. He wants to take me away for the weekend, I told her. Isolated bed and breakfast 3 hours from home. Perfect, Helen said, and my stomach dropped. Perfect, Helen. He is going to try to kill me. Yes, he is, and we are going to be ready for him. Carol, this is our chance to catch him in the act, with overwhelming evidence. If we arrest him now, a good lawyer might get the charges reduced. But if we catch him attempting murder with you as the intended victim, you will not be alone, Helen said. We will have agents positioned around the property. You will be wearing multiple recording devices. The moment Mark makes a move, we will be there. What if you are not fast enough? I asked. Helen's voice was steady and professional. Then I will spend the rest of my career making sure Mark Miller never sees daylight again. Not exactly the reassurance I was hoping for, but it would have to do. That afternoon, I drove to Ryan's garage to pick up my car. He had installed a tracking device and what he called a few other modifications that Helen had requested. What kind of modifications? I asked. Ryan smiled grimly. Let us just say if someone tries to mess with your brakes again, they are in for a surprise. I do not understand. Mrs. Miller, my brother, works for the FBI. I have made a few cars for undercover work. Your Toyota Camry is not quite as helpless as it looks anymore. Friday afternoon, Mark loaded our weekend bags into his truck. Leave your car here, he said. Save gas, and I like driving us places. Of course he wanted to control the transportation. Cannot stage a convincing car accident if the intended victim might be able to escape. That is sweet, I said, climbing into the passenger seat. I love when you drive. The bed and breakfast was exactly what I had expected. Isolated, charming, the kind of place where a grieving widower could tell a tragic story about his wife's accidental fall from their balcony. The room Mark had selected was on the 3rd floor with a stunning view of the river valley and a balcony with a railing that looked suspiciously low. Beautiful view, I commented, stepping outside to admire the scenery while noting the 30-foot drop to the rocky riverbank below. Breathtaking, Mark agreed, standing behind Mia, little too close behind me. That evening at dinner, Mark was more attentive than he had been in years, ordering wine, holding my hand, gazing into my eyes like we were newlyweds. I want you to know how much I love you, he said over dessert. How grateful I am for all our years together. That sounds almost like a goodbye, I said lightly. Mark's smile flickered. Not goodbye, just appreciation. Life is so fragile, is it not? You never know what tomorrow might bring. The wire caught every meaningful look, every loaded pause, every carefully chosen word. Back in our room, Mark suggested we open the bottle of champagne he had brought. Special occasion, he said. Time to celebrate our love. I watched him pour the drinks, noting how he turned slightly away from me while handling my glass. When he handed it to me, I saw the faint residue at the bottom that had not quite dissolved. To us, Mark said, raising his glass. To us, I echoed, bringing the glass to my lips but not drinking. Mark drained his champagne in 3 swallows, then set his glass down and moved to the sliding door that led to the balcony. Let us watch the stars, he said. The sky is so clear tonight. It was 11:47 p.m., prime time for tragic accidents when the victim was too drugged to resist and too groggy to scream effectively. I followed Mark onto the balcony, still holding my untouched champagne. The night air was cool, the railing exactly as low as I had feared. Carol, Mark said, moving behind me again. I need to tell you something. What is that, honey? His hands settled on my shoulders, then moved to my waist. I am sorry. Sorry for what I have to do. That was when he pushed or tried to push, but I had spent the last week working with Helen's team, learning how to shift my weight, how to turn unexpected momentum into controlled movement. Instead of going over the railing, I spun sideways and stepped clear. Mark stumbled forward off balance from his own force and grabbed the railing to steady himself. FBI, nobody move! Floodlights blazed from multiple directions as agents surrounded the balcony. Helen's voice came through a bullhorn. Mark Miller, you are under arrest for attempted murder. Mark turned to look at me, his face a mask of confusion and rage. You knew? I knew. I confirmed. What I do not understand is why. 22 years, Mark. Was I really that much of a burden? It was not personal, he said as agents handcuffed him. It was just business. Just business. 22 years of marriage and my murder would have been just business. As they led Mark away, Helen appeared at my side. Are you okay? I am fine. Did you get everything you need? Helen smiled. Attempted murder, conspiracy, insurance fraud, and based on what we found in his phone records tonight, we are reopening 3 other suspicious deaths. Your husband just bought himself a life sentence. I looked out over the balcony where I had almost died, thinking about Ethan's innocent observation that had saved my life. Children really do see everything, do they not? Even when the adults around them are too trusting to notice. Maybe, especially then. The next morning, sitting in an FBI conference room in Chicago, I learned just how deep Mark's planning had gone. Helen spread photographs and documents across the table like playing cards, each one revealing another layer of my husband's deception. The bed and breakfast was researched extensively, she explained. He had visited 3 times in the past 6 months, always alone, always paying cash. He met with the owner twice to discuss the perfect romantic room for his wife. He was rehearsing. More than that, he was establishing a relationship, creating witnesses who would testify about what a devoted husband he was. Helen Walker pulled out a transcript. Here is what the owner told our agents this morning. Mr. Miller was so thoughtful, wanted everything perfect for his wife's birthday surprise. He specifically asked about the room with the balcony, said she loved scenic views. My birthday was not until December. It was currently September. What about the other deaths, Uncle Frank Sullivan and the others? Helen's expression grew grim. Frank Sullivan died in a car accident, but the mechanic who examined the wreckage found evidence of brake tampering, similar to what happened to your car but more sophisticated. Your husband was improving his technique, and James Thompson, he died of apparent heart failure, but we are exhuming the body for toxicology tests. Gary Wilson, the business partner, died of what appeared to be cancer, but his symptoms match certain rare poisoning patterns. Mark Miller's military chemical training explains how he knew exactly which compounds to use. I stared at the photographs of 3 men I had known. 3 men I had mourned with Mark. How long do you think he has been doing this, based on the financial records we have uncovered? Possibly a decade, Helen said. Small amounts at first, learning how to forge documents, studying poison interactions, perfecting accident scenarios. Helen leaned forward. Carol, your husband was not just a murderer. He was a serial killer who specialized in people who trusted him. The room felt cold despite the warm September afternoon. What about Eleanor Davis when she got sick that summer? We are flying her to Madison this afternoon, Helen said. The FBI medical team wants to run some tests, see if there are any lingering effects from whatever Mark gave her. And if there are, then we add attempted murder to his charges. Agent Davis, Helen's partner, entered the room carrying a laptop. The search of the Miller house is complete. You need to see this. Davis opened the laptop and showed me photographs of a hidden room in our basement. Behind a false wall that I had never noticed was a complete laboratory setup, chemistry equipment, reference books on toxicology, detailed notes on dozens of different poisons and their effects. This is a 10-year collection, Davis said. Your husband has been studying murder the way some people study stamp collecting, he added. There were files on every person Mark had ever killed or attempted to kill. Photos, personal information, relationship details, and what he called elimination protocols. Each file contained practice schedules, timing charts, and backup plans. My file was 3 inches thick. "He has been planning your death for 2 years," Helen Walker said softly. "Ever since your mother was diagnosed with cancer and he realized you might inherit property. But he changed the timeline when I told him about the fictional trust fund." "Exactly. We found his revised plans. Originally, he was going to wait until your 60th birthday, make it look like you fell down the stairs at home. But when he thought there was more money involved, he got greedy." Agent Davis pulled up another file. "There is something else. Mark was not working alone." The screen showed email exchanges between Mark Miller and someone called M. Simmons. Detailed discussions about document forgery, poison procurement, and what looked like a fee structure for professional services. "Who is M. Simmons?" "Melissa Simmons," Helen replied. "Professional forger with clients across 3 states. She has been selling Mark fake death certificates, modified medical records, and altered insurance policies. We arrested her 2 hours ago." I thought about all the papers I had found in Mark's office, all those perfect signatures I had assumed he had forged himself. "How many people were involved in planning my murder?" I asked. "At least 4 that we know of so far," Helen said. "Mark Melissa, a chemist named Dr. Robert Cruz, who was supplying untraceable poisons, and someone we are still identifying who was providing surveillance equipment." "Surveillance equipment?" Davis showed me more photos from the basement laboratory. Tiny cameras, listening devices, GPS trackers. "Mark has been monitoring your movements for over a year," Davis said. "He knew everywhere you went, everyone you talked to, every routine you followed." That explained so much. How Mark always seemed to know when I would be home from the grocery store. Why he had started texting me during my volunteer shifts at the literacy center. Why he had been so interested in my weekly coffee dates with my friend Margaret Hale. "Was Margaret in danger?" I asked. "We do not think so," Helen said, "but we are warning everyone in your social circle to be careful until we have rounded up all of Mark's associates." The meeting lasted another 3 hours. Forms to sign, statements to give, protection protocols to discuss. The FBI was taking Mark's operation seriously, treating it as an organized criminal enterprise rather than simple domestic violence. "When can I go home?" I asked. Helen and Davis exchanged glances. "Carol, we do not recommend that," Helen said. "Mark's associates do not know he has been arrested yet. If they think you are a threat to their operation, you think they might come after me. We think they might try to clean up loose ends." "Yes." So I was moved to a safe house in Madison, a comfortable suburban ranch with FBI agents posing as neighbors. My sister, Eleanor Davis, arrived that evening pale and shaken after her medical evaluation. "They found traces," she said without preamble. "Heavy metals in my blood, damage to my kidneys that the doctors could not explain 3 years ago. Mark poisoned me." We sat in the safe house kitchen, drinking tea and processing the reality that my husband had tried to kill my sister as practice for killing me. "Why did you not die?" I asked. "Not that I am complaining, but if Mark was trying to poison you—" "I left earlier than planned," Eleanor said. "Remember, my flight got moved up because of that storm system. I was supposed to stay another week, long enough for the poison to work." Eleanor nodded grimly. "The FBI doctor thinks Mark was using me to test dosages, timing, and delivery methods. If I had stayed the full visit, you would be dead, and he would have known exactly how to kill me." That night, lying in an unfamiliar bed in a house guarded by federal agents, I thought about the strange series of events that had saved my life. Ethan's innocent observation, Ryan's willingness to help Eleanor's suspicious nature, Helen Walker's expertise. But mostly, I thought about the fact that my husband of 22 years had been planning to murder me for 2 of those years, and I had never suspected a thing. Tomorrow, I would start rebuilding my life without the man who had systematically destroyed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. But tonight, I was just grateful to be alive. 3 weeks later, I stood in the hallway of the Dane County Courthouse in Madison, watching Mark's arraignment through a window. He looked smaller, somehow older, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his usual flannel shirts and jeans. His lawyer, a sharp-suited man named Richard Pearson, was arguing for reduced bail. Your Honor, Mr. Miller has no prior criminal record, strong ties to the community, and poses no flight risk. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Laura Benton, stood up immediately. Your Honor, the defendant is charged with conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and insurance fraud. We expect additional charges as our investigation continues. He has organized a criminal enterprise spanning multiple states with at least 4 confirmed victims. Alleged victims? Pearson corrected. No, Benton replied coldly. Confirmed victims. James Thompson's exhumed body tested positive for 3 different rare toxins. Frank Sullivan's car accident has been reclassified as homicide. Gary Wilson's medical records show poisoning patterns consistent with a 2-year systematic murder plan. The judge, a stern woman named Harriet Blackwell, reviewed the documents in front of her. Mr. Pearson, your client is accused of operating what amounts to a murder-for-profit scheme. Bail is denied. Mark's shoulders sagged. He turned toward the gallery, scanning the faces until he found mine. For a moment, our eyes met through the glass. He looked confused, as if he genuinely could not understand how his perfect plan had fallen apart. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no satisfaction, just a strange emptiness where 22 years of love used to be. After the hearing, Helen Walker drove me to the FBI field office in Madison for another debriefing. The investigation had expanded beyond anything I had imagined. Melissa Simmons is cooperating, Helen said as we walked through the building. She has provided documentation for over 30 forged death certificates, modified insurance policies, and fake medical records. Mark's operation was much larger than we initially thought. 30 people, I asked. No 30 cases. Some clients had multiple victims. This was essentially a murder consulting business. In the conference room, Agent Davis had set up a timeline covering an entire wall, names, dates, locations, all connected by colored strings like something from a crime drama. Mark started small, Davis explained. Insurance fraud, minor document forgery, helping people fake their own deaths for financial reasons. But about 5 years ago, he transitioned into actual murder for hire. Who is hiring him? I asked. Spouses mostly, Davis said. People who wanted their partners dead but did not want to do it themselves. Mark provided the expertise, the planning, the execution. His clients maintained plausible deniability. Helen pointed to a cluster of cases in Wisconsin and Minnesota. We think he was responsible for at least 12 deaths in the past 5 years. Always made to look accidental, always with significant insurance payouts. What made him decide to kill me? I was not paying him. You were not a client, Davis said. You were a test case. Mark was developing new methods, perfecting his techniques. Your death would have provided both money and proof of concept for his more sophisticated approaches. I stared at the timeline, seeing my name at the far right with today's date circled in red, the endpoint of a decade-long progression from petty fraud to serial murder. How many people would be alive today if Ethan had not mentioned seeing Mark under my car? Impossible to say, Helen replied. But we found evidence that Mark was already planning his next client consultation, a woman in Minneapolis whose husband wanted her dead. What happens to her now? She is safe, Helen said. We arrested the husband this morning, conspiracy to commit murder based on the emails we found on Mark's computer. Over the following days, the story dominated local news. Suburban serial killer caught by grandson's observation. FBI breaks up murder for hire ring. Madison woman escapes husband's death plot. I stopped reading the articles after the third reporter called me lucky. Lucky as if discovering that your husband was a serial killer who had spent 2 years planning your murder was some kind of blessing. David and Emily were devastated. They had loved Mark, trusted him completely, welcomed him into their family without question. The knowledge that he had been planning to murder David's mother while playing grandfather to David's son had shattered something fundamental in their world. "I keep thinking about all the times he was alone with Ethan," Emily said when she visited the safe house. "All the times he volunteered to babysit to take Ethan to the park. What if he was not interested in children?" I assured her that Ethan was never in danger. "How can you be sure?" she asked. Helen Walker, who was present for the conversation, answered, "Based on our profile analysis, your stepfather-in-law was motivated purely by financial gain. Children do not typically have life insurance policies or inheritable assets. They were not useful to his operation." It was a cold comfort, but it was comfort nonetheless. 2 months after Mark's arrest, I stood in the living room of what used to be our house sorting through belongings under FBI supervision. Everything was evidence until the investigation concluded, but they had allowed me to collect personal items and sentimental belongings. I picked up a photo of our wedding day. Mark and me looking impossibly young and happy. 25-year-old Carol in white lace. 27-year-old Mark in a rented tuxedo, both of us believing we were starting a fairy tale life together. "Take it or leave it?" Helen asked, noting my hesitation. "Leave it," I said, setting the photo back on the mantel. "That woman does not exist anymore." The woman who had emerged from Mark's murder plot was stronger, wiser, and infinitely more suspicious of people who seemed too good to be true. She was also angrier than she had expected to be. Not at Mark necessarily. He was what he was, a predator who had hidden his nature behind a mask of suburban normality, but at herself for being so trusting, so naive, so willfully blind to the signs that must have been there all along. Helen seemed to read my thoughts. "Do not blame yourself for not seeing it," she said. "Psychopaths are experts at manipulation. They study normal human behavior and mimic it perfectly. You were not stupid for trusting him. You were human." "Human stupidity nearly got me killed," I said quietly. "Human kindness kept you alive," Helen replied. "You noticed Ethan's observation because you pay attention to children. You called the mechanic because you trust your instincts. You cooperated with us because you believe in justice. Those are good qualities, Carol. Do not let Mark's evil make you cynical about your own goodness." Easy for her to say. She was not the one who had spent 22 years sleeping next to a man who was planning her murder. But as I walked through the house collecting the pieces of my former life, I realized Helen was right about one thing. I was still alive. Mark's plan had failed completely, and there was something deeply satisfying about that fact, something that felt very much like victory. The trial began on a cold February morning, 4 months after my would-be murder at the Wisconsin Dells. I sat in the front row of the gallery, wearing the navy blue suit I had bought specifically for this day. Mark entered the courtroom in shackles, his hair grayer than I remembered, his face thinner. He looked like what he was, a man whose carefully constructed world had collapsed around him. The prosecution's opening statement was devastating. Assistant District Attorney Laura Benton laid out the entire conspiracy with clinical precision, using charts, photographs, and documents to illustrate the scope of Mark's criminal enterprise. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Benton said, "this is not a crime of passion. This is not a momentary lapse in judgment. This is the story of a man who spent over a decade building a business around murder, who turned killing into a systematic, profitable enterprise." She showed photographs of Mark's victims: Frank Sullivan smiling at a family barbecue, James Thompson at his daughter's wedding, Gary Wilson holding a newborn grandchild. Each photo was followed by crime scene images, autopsy reports, and evidence of how Mark had ended their lives. And then Benton continued, "There is Carol Miller, the defendant's wife of 22 years, who survived only because of an innocent observation from her 6-year-old grandson. The defense attorney, Richard Pearson, tried a different approach. His opening statement painted Mark as a man driven to desperation by financial pressure, a loving husband who had made terrible choices, but who was not the mastermind of an organized criminal enterprise. "My client is guilty of poor judgment," Pearson said. "Guilty of fraud, guilty of deception. But the prosecution wants you to believe he is some kind of criminal genius, a calculated killer who orchestrated elaborate murder plots. The truth is much simpler. Mark Miller is a weak man who got in over his head with dangerous people. It was a reasonable strategy, but it fell apart during the first day of testimony." Melissa Simmons, the document forger, testified about her business relationship with Mark. "He was very professional," she said from the witness stand. "Always paid on time, always provided clear specifications for what he needed: death certificates, insurance modifications, identity documents. He knew exactly what he wanted and how to use it." "How many documents did you create for Mr. Miller over the past 5 years?" Benton asked. 47 different items. Death certificates for 6 different people, modified insurance policies for 8 clients, fake medical records for 12 individuals. "And Mr. Miller paid you how much for these services?" $240,000 over 5 years. The jury absorbed this information silently. Richard Pearson tried to minimize the damage during cross-examination, suggesting that Melissa Simmons was the real criminal mastermind and Mark was simply one of her customers. But Melissa was not having it. "Mr. Miller provided the planning," she said firmly. "I just provided the paperwork. He would tell me exactly what documents he needed when he needed them and how they fit into his timeline. This was his operation." The second day brought Ryan Carter, my mechanic, who testified about the brake line sabotage on my car. He had brought photographs, technical diagrams, and a piece of the actual brake line to demonstrate how the tampering had been done. "This was not random vandalism," Ryan explained to the jury. "This was surgical work designed to create brake failure at a specific time under specific conditions. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." "In your expert opinion," Benton asked, "how much automotive knowledge would someone need to perform this type of sabotage?" 20 years minimum," Ryan replied. "You would need to understand hydraulic systems, metal fatigue patterns, and timing mechanisms. This was the work of someone with serious mechanical expertise." Pearson's cross-examination focused on the possibility that someone else had sabotaged my car, but Ryan shut that down immediately. "Mrs. Miller's car was in her garage every night," Ryan said. "The only person with consistent access was her husband." Day 3 was Ethan's testimony conducted in the judge's chambers, with only essential personnel present. I watched through a video link as my 6-year-old grandson, looking impossibly small in the big leather chair, answered questions about what he had seen. "Can you tell us what Grandpa Mark did after Grandma Carol drove away?" the prosecutor asked gently. "He went to the garage and got his tools," Ethan said matter-of-factly. "Then he crawled under Grandma's car and did stuff to it." "What kind of stuff?" "Touching things with his screwdriver. Making little noises like fixing things but quiet." "Did Grandpa Mark know you were watching?" Ethan shook his head solemnly. "I was supposed to be napping, but I was looking out the window instead." Even through the video link, I could see the impact Ethan's testimony had on the jury. This was not a coached witness or someone with an agenda. This was a child reporting what he had seen with the honest clarity that only children possess. The fourth day brought the FBI forensics team, who testified about the evidence found in our basement laboratory. Agent Samuel Richardson, the lead forensics specialist, walked the jury through photographs of Mark's murder planning room. "This represents approximately 10 years of systematic research," Richardson testified. "We found detailed files on 37 different individuals, comprehensive notes on various poison interactions, timing charts for staging different types of accidents, and what appeared to be practice schedules for perfecting different murder techniques. Practice. The word hung heavy in the courtroom air. Schedules? Benton asked. The defendant kept detailed records of his practice sessions. Agent Samuel Richardson replied. When he tested different poisons on laboratory animals, when he practiced document forgery, when he rehearsed breaking into vehicles to plant tracking devices. This was methodical preparation for criminal activity. Richard Pearson's cross-examination was increasingly desperate. Agent Richardson, is it not possible that my client was writing crime fiction, that these were not actual murder plans, but creative writing exercises? Richardson looked at Pearson with barely concealed contempt. Mr. Pearson, your client's creative writing resulted in 6 confirmed deaths and 1 attempted murder. If this was fiction, it was remarkably deadly fiction. On the 5th day, I testified. Benton had prepared me extensively for this moment, but sitting in the witness box, looking out at the jury, I felt the weight of everything that had brought me to this point. Mrs. Miller, Benton began, how long were you married to the defendant? 22 years. During that time, did you ever suspect that your husband was involved in criminal activity? No. Mark Wash seemed like the most normal man in the world. Reliable, predictable, boring even. He went to work, came home, watched television, worked in his garden. If someone had told me a year ago that my husband was a serial killer, I would have laughed at them. What changed? I looked across the courtroom at Mark, who was staring at his hands. My grandson, Ethan, noticed something I had been too trusting to see. Children notice everything, do they not? They do not make the same assumptions adults do about the people they are supposed to be able to trust. Benton walked me through the timeline of discovery, from Ethan's observation to Ryan's findings to the FBI investigation. I testified about finding the files in Mark's office, about the forged insurance documents, about the maps of my daily routines. How did it feel, Benton asked, to discover that your husband of 22 years had been planning your murder? Pearson objected to the question as irrelevant, but Judge Harriet Blackwell allowed it. It felt like waking up in someone else's life, I said. Like discovering that everything I thought I knew about my own existence was a lie. The man I had shared a bed with, cooked meals for, planned a future with, he had been studying me like a laboratory animal, figuring out the most efficient way to kill me. Are you afraid of the defendant? No, I said, and realized I meant it. I am not afraid of Mark anymore. He is a pathetic man who thought he was clever enough to get away with murder. He was wrong. During cross-examination, Pearson tried to paint me as vindictive, suggesting that I had fabricated evidence or collaborated with the FBI to frame an innocent man. Mrs. Miller, is it not true that you and your husband were having marital problems, that you wanted out of the marriage and saw this as an opportunity to destroy him? Mr. Pearson, I said calmly, if I wanted to destroy my husband, I would not have needed to make anything up. His own actions were quite sufficient. But you were angry about the insurance policy. Were you not angry that your husband had taken out a policy on your life without telling you? I was angry about a lot of things. I was angry that my husband forged my signature on legal documents. I was angry that he had been poisoning my sister. I was angry that he had murdered his uncle and his best friend. But mostly, I was angry that he had turned our entire marriage into an elaborate murder plot. Pearson pressed harder. Mrs. Miller, is it possible that you misinterpreted innocent activities? That your husband's interest in your daily routines was simple concern for your safety? I looked at him for a long moment, then turned to address the jury directly. Ladies and gentlemen, I know how this sounds. I know it is hard to believe that someone could live with a serial killer for 22 years and not know it. But that is exactly what predators count on. Our inability to believe that evil can wear such a normal face. My husband did not fail because I was particularly smart or observant. He failed because a 6-year-old boy happened to be looking out a window at the wrong time. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Judge Harriet Blackwell sentenced Mark Miller to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As they led him away, Mark turned to look at me one last time. His mouth moved, and I thought he might be saying, "I am sorry." But I could not hear him over the sound of the courtroom door closing. 6 months after Mark's sentencing, I stood in the kitchen of my new apartment, making coffee for one and reading the morning newspaper. The front page carried a story about Martha Stevens receiving 15 years for her role in the murder conspiracy, but I barely glanced at it. I was more interested in the real estate section. The insurance money from the policies Mark had taken out on the victims had been seized as proceeds of criminal activity, but my mother's house in Florida remained untouched. I had finally decided to sell our Milwaukee home. Too many memories, too much contaminated history, and move somewhere warmer. Somewhere without associations to my old life. St. Petersburg, Florida, looked promising, near the water, reasonable cost of living, enough distance from Milwaukee that I was unlikely to run into reporters or curious neighbors who wanted to discuss my experience as the woman who survived the suburban serial killer. My phone rang as I was circling apartment ads. David's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, honey." "Mom, how are you doing?" The question that had become a ritual between us. David checked on me every few days now, still processing the guilt of having loved and trusted the man who had tried to murder his mother. "I am fine, David. Actually, I am great. I am thinking about moving to Florida." "Florida? That is sudden." "Not really. I have been thinking about it since Mom died. Now seems like the right time for a fresh start." David was quiet for a moment. "Are you running away?" "No," I said, surprised by the question. "I am running towards something. There is a difference." "What are you running toward?" I thought about that. What was I looking for in Florida besides distance from the past freedom? I think the freedom to be whoever I want to be instead of who everyone thinks I should be. "What do you mean, David?" For the past year, I had been the woman who survived, the victim who got lucky, the wife who had been too naive to see what was right in front of her. I am tired of being defined by what Mark Miller did to me. "You are not a victim, Mom." "No, I am not. I am a woman who figured out she was in danger and did something about it. I am a woman who helped the FBI take down a serial killer. I am a woman who survived 22 years with a psychopath and came out stronger." David laughed, the first genuine laugh I had heard from him in months. "When you put it that way, you sound pretty formidable." I am pretty formidable. It just took me 58 years to figure that out. After we hung up, I continued reading the real estate ads. But my mind wandered to something Helen Walker had mentioned during our last meeting. "Have you ever thought about writing a book?" she had asked. "Your story could help other women recognize the warning signs, understand their legal rights." At the time, I had dismissed the idea. Who would want to read about my experience? What could I possibly say that would be helpful to anyone else? But sitting in my apartment thinking about moving to Florida, starting over, creating a new life from scratch, I realized Helen might be right. Not about writing a book necessarily, but about helping other women. I thought about all the wives and daughters and mothers who might be living with their own versions of Markmen, who seemed loving and normal on the surface but were planning something terrible underneath. Women who, like me, were too trusting to see the signs until it was almost too late. I pulled out my laptop and started writing. During breakfast, my 6-year-old grandson looked up from his cereal and said something that saved my life. 3 hours later, I had 5 pages. A week later, I had 20. A month later, I had the outline for something that might actually become a book. But more importantly, I had a purpose. The doorbell rang on a Tuesday afternoon in November. I opened it to find a young woman in her 30s nervously twisting her wedding ring. "Are you Carol Miller, the woman who—" she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The woman whose husband tried to kill her. Yes, that is me. How can I help you? My name is Lisa Chen. I read about your case in the newspaper. I think my husband might be planning something similar. I invited Lisa in, made her coffee, and listened to her story. Small things, she said. My husband's sudden interest in my daily routine, questions about my life insurance policy, strange comments about how much easier his life would be if I were not around to worry about. Everyone says I am being paranoid, Lisa said. My family thinks I am imagining things, but when I read about your case, about how normal your husband seemed. What is your husband's name? David Chen. He works for an insurance company. I felt a chill run down my spine. Lisa, has your husband ever asked you to sign papers without reading them? Has he ever made comments about your will or your beneficiaries? Lisa's face went pale. How did you know? I reached for my phone and called Helen Walker. Helen? It is Carol. I am sitting here with a woman named Lisa Chen, whose husband works in insurance and has been asking suspicious questions about her life insurance policy. Helen was at my apartment within an hour. 2 days later, David Chen was under FBI surveillance. A week after that, he was arrested for conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. Lisa had been 3 days away from an accidental fall down the stairs that would have killed her and netted David $500,000 in life insurance money. The case made national news. Suburban serial killer's victim helps save another woman. FBI breaks up second murder plot with help from survivor. This time, I agreed to do interviews. What made you recognize the signs in Lisa's case? The reporter asked. Experience, I said. Once you have lived with a predator, once you understand how they operate, you develop instincts for recognizing the patterns. Do you think there are others out there, other women in similar situations? I know there are. The FBI estimates that insurance-related domestic murder attempts are vastly underreported. Most of them succeed because the victims do not realize they are in danger until it is too late. What advice would you give to women who might be in similar situations? I looked directly into the camera. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is wrong. Do not dismiss your concerns because the person threatening you is someone you love. Love does not mean being naive about danger. And if you are not sure, then call someone. Call the police. Call the FBI. Call me if you have to. Do not try to handle it alone. The interview aired on a Thursday. By Friday, I had received over 200 emails from women describing suspicious behavior from their husbands or boyfriends. Helen Walker and I spent the weekend going through them, identifying the cases that warranted immediate investigation. 7 women were moved to safe houses. 4 men were arrested. 2 ongoing murder plots were stopped before they could be executed. That was when I realized what I was going to do with the rest of my life. I was not moving to Florida to hide from my past. I was moving to Florida to build something new on the foundation of my experience, a consulting business, maybe a nonprofit organization, something that helped women recognize when they were in danger and gave them the tools to protect themselves. I thought about Ethan, whose innocent observation had started everything. Children see what adults miss because they do not have preconceived notions about how people should behave. Maybe that was the key, teaching women to see their relationships with the clarity of children without the filters of love and trust that could blind them to danger. I called the real estate agent in St. Petersburg and made an offer on a small office building near the beach. Time to start saving lives instead of just surviving them. 1 year later, I stood in the sunny conference room of the Carol Miller Foundation for Domestic Safety, watching Lisa Chen address a group of 20 women whose husbands had been arrested for various murder plots. 6 months ago, I thought I was going crazy, Lisa said from the front of the room. My husband was so loving, so concerned about my well-being. When I started noticing strange things, the questions about my insurance, the sudden interest in my daily schedule, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. The women in the audience nodded knowingly. They had all been through similar experiences, all struggled with the cognitive dissonance of loving someone who was planning to kill them. But Carol taught me that paranoia and survival instincts are sometimes the same thing, Lisa continued. Learning to trust what I was seeing instead of what I wanted to believe saved my life. After the meeting, I walked out onto the deck of our St. Petersburg office building, looking out over Tampa Bay while processing the day's conversations. The Carol Miller Foundation for Domestic Safety had grown beyond anything I had imagined when I first moved to Florida. We now employed 12 full-time staff members, including former FBI agents, social workers, legal advocates, and financial counselors. Our hotline received over 100 calls per week. We had helped law enforcement agencies in 15 states identify and prosecute domestic murder plots. The work was exactly as rewarding and exactly as heartbreaking as I had expected. My phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen as it did every Tuesday and Friday for our weekly check-ins. "Hi, honey. How is my favorite grandson?" I asked. Ethan replied, voice excited and proud. "Grandma Carol, I told my teacher about how I saved your life, and she wants me to talk to the whole class about paying attention to things that seem wrong." "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. What are you going to tell them?" I asked. "That grown-ups sometimes do not see things because they think they already know what is happening. But kids notice everything because we do not know what is normal yet," Ethan explained. He had inadvertently summarized the core philosophy of everything we were trying to teach at the foundation. "Ethan, you are absolutely right," I said. "Sometimes not knowing what is normal is exactly what makes you smart enough to see danger." After David and Ethan hung up, I remained on the deck watching fishing boats return to harbor as the sun set over the bay. My life in Florida was everything I had hoped it would be: meaningful work, warm weather, independence, and the satisfaction of turning my worst experience into something that helped other women survive similar situations. But the best part was not the work or the weather. The best part was the woman I had become. The old Carol Jenkins had been trusting to the point of naivety, accommodating to the point of self-destruction, loving to the point of blindness. She had spent 22 years married to a serial killer and never suspected a thing. The new Carol Jenkins was harder to fool. She asked questions, demanded documentation, and trusted her instincts over her emotions. She had built a business around helping other women develop the same suspicious clarity that had saved her life. My assistant Rebecca stuck her head out onto the deck. "Carol, there is a call online too. FBI agent Helen Walker wants to discuss a case in Michigan." Helen Walker had become both a close friend and a frequent collaborator. The foundation worked with law enforcement agencies across the country, providing consultation on cases that might involve domestic murder plots. "Put her through to my office," I said, gathering my things from the deck table. "Helen, what is happening in Michigan?" "3 suspicious deaths in the Grand Rapids area," Helen Walker said. "All married women, all with significant life insurance policies, all with husbands who had access to automotive repair knowledge. Sound familiar?" "Very familiar. Are the husbands connected?" "That is what we are trying to figure out," Helen replied. "The local police think they might be dealing with another Mark Miller situation, either a copycat killer or someone who learned from studying your case. What do you need from us?" "Your profile expertise. Can you review the case files and tell us if you see the same patterns you lived with?" 2 hours later, I was reviewing photographs and police reports that made my skin crawl. 3 women, Jennifer Wallace, 42, Margaret Foster, 38, and Susan Brady, 45, had all died in car accidents involving brake failure. Their husbands, Kevin Wallace, Daniel Foster, and Michael Brady, had all behaved exactly like Mark in the aftermath. Grief-stricken widowers who had been devoted husbands, suddenly wealthy men, already making plans for their insurance windfalls. But there were differences, too. These accidents had been more sophisticated than Mark's initial attempts, suggesting that someone had learned from his mistakes. I called Helen back. "These are not coincidences," I told her. Someone studied Mark's methods and improved on them. But I think there is something you missed. Look at the timeline. Jennifer Wallace died 8 months ago. Margaret Foster died 6 months ago. Susan Brady died 4 months ago. That is an escalating pattern. Meaning, whoever is doing this is getting more confident, more efficient. The gaps between murders are shrinking. If the pattern holds, he is planning another murder soon. How soon? Based on the progression, 2 weeks, maybe less. Helen was quiet for a moment. Carol, we have identified 12 women in the Grand Rapids area whose husbands fit the profile. Similar financial situations, similar insurance policies, similar access to automotive equipment. Then you need to warn all 12 tonight. Already in progress, Helen said, but we could use your help with the interviews. These women need to hear from someone who has been where they are. I will be on a plane tomorrow morning. That night packing for the trip to Michigan, I thought about how much my life had changed since Ethan's innocent observation at the breakfast table. I had gone from potential victim to survivor to advocate to expert, but mostly I had gone from trusting everyone to trusting my instincts. And my instincts told me that Grand Rapids was about to become very dangerous for a lot of women. 3 days later, I sat in a hotel conference room with 11 women whose husbands were under FBI surveillance. The 12th woman, Patricia Murray, had been moved to a safe house after her husband was caught on camera tampering with her car's brake lines. I know this is terrifying, I told the group. I know it feels impossible to believe that the man you love, the man you sleep next to every night, could be planning to kill you. But I need you to understand something. Your survival depends on believing the evidence instead of believing the love. Patricia Murray raised her hand. How do you get past it? How do you learn to trust anyone again? Slowly, I said honestly, very slowly. But the alternative is staying afraid forever. And I refuse to let murderers steal the rest of my life along with the part they already took. Do you date? Are you in a relationship? I smiled, thinking about Daniel Morrison, the bookstore owner I had been seeing for the past 3 months, a kind, patient man who understood that I needed extensive background checks and slow progress, who laughed when I asked Helen Walker to run his name through FBI databases. I am actually, I said, smiling. And the wonderful thing about having survived what we have survived is that we are really, really good at spotting red flags early. The women laughed some for the first time in weeks. Ladies, I continued, what happened to us was terrible, but it also made us incredibly difficult to fool. Any man who wants to be in our lives now has to earn that privilege every single day. And honestly, that is how it should have been all along. 6 months later, I received a letter from Patricia Murray. Her husband had been sentenced to life in prison for murdering 3 women and attempting to murder a 4th. Patricia was in graduate school studying criminal justice planning to become a victim advocate. You showed me that surviving was not enough, she wrote. You showed me that I could turn survival into purpose. That evening, I walked on the beach near my apartment, thinking about Ethan's observation that had saved my life and changed everything that came after. Children see what adults miss because they do not make assumptions about how people should behave. Maybe that was the most important lesson of all, that love and trust should be earned, not assumed. That questions and vigilance are not paranoia when your life depends on the answers. I pulled out my phone and called Ethan. Grandma Carol! His voice was bright with excitement. Guess what my teacher wants me to make a presentation for the whole school about paying attention to safety. That is wonderful, sweetheart. What are you going to tell them? That if something seems wrong, it probably is wrong, and that kids should always tell grown-ups when they notice scary things. Even if the grown-ups might not want to hear it, Ethan, you are going to save a lot of lives with that presentation, just like you save lives with your work. Exactly like that. As I hung up, I realized that Ethan was right. We were both in the business of saving lives now. He taught children to notice danger and speak up about it. I taught women to trust their instincts and act on them. Different approaches, same goal-making, sure that innocent observations from 6-year-old boys were not the only thing standing between predators and their victims. The sun was setting over Tampa Bay, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new women in danger, and new opportunities to turn tragedy into triumph. But tonight, I was simply grateful to be alive, independent, and absolutely impossible to fool. After 22 years of marriage to a serial killer, I had finally learned the difference between love and survival. And I chose survival every single time. Thank you for listening. Do not forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.